mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Evolution of Personalization. Our speakers for today are Adam Corey and Carl Fredericks. As the VP of Marketing and Business Development, Adam Corey leads Tealium's marketing and partnership efforts and is responsible for driving awareness around the power of Tealium and cultivating alliances with the best-of-breed customer data solutions. He has over 13 years of experience in digital analytics, marketing, and business development. Carl Fredericks is a senior managing consultant for retail and consumer brands at Maxymiser. Having worked in the website optimization space for over 10 years, Carl has extensive knowledge in customer experience optimization and works with top brands such as Harry & David, Epson, and Forever 21. So before we begin, I'd just like to encourage everyone to socialize with us during today's webinar. The Twitter handles for Maxymiser and Tealium are just @Maxymiser and @Tealium. And please feel free to send any questions you have throughout the presentation through the control panel on GoToWebinar or on Twitter, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Okay, take it away, Adam.
Great. Thank you so much, Anna. Thank you, Carl, and thanks to everybody for joining today for our presentation. So I'd love to talk a bit about our customers out there that are interacting with our brands and really the challenge and the opportunity that we as marketers have to take action on that data in real time. If we think about where we were all supposed to be at this point in our evolution, we really think about the number of channels that our customers have to interact with us and the opportunity that we have to engage them. Yet in a lot of ways, we're still a little out of reach of what I call the holy grail of digital marketing. I think real-time personalization is one of these things that's become that ideal pinnacle of success that we all strive for, because our customers and our visitors really expect a consistent, real-time, relevant and personalized experience for them. They don't really care what channel or what device they interact on, and that's really the omni-channel experience that we're all striving for. But I think as marketers and as we look at what we're challenged with on a daily basis, developing that clear definition of personalization, let alone crafting a proper strategy around it, has really proven to be a challenge for all of us. So in today's presentation, we'd love to talk about some of the massive expectations that our consumers are really expecting today with their always on, always present engagement strategies, and really where we sit as marketers today. If we look at some of the stats that I have up here, over half of us are saying that there are resource constraints that are stopping or slowing down our ability to integrate one or more of our data sources together. And 80% of us say that without this integrated data from all of the silos and all the channels, we can't effectively manage the customer journey. I would love to meet those 20% who actually said that they could do this without the integrated data. I'd love to see what they're doing, or if they're just charging forward without it. But if we think about as we want to leverage experiences that our customers have across devices, engage them in the channels that they like, and be able to act on those in real time, there's quite a bit of an integration challenge, and that's one of the things that Tealium has focused quite a bit of its charter around. If we think about what we've been doing from a targeting standpoint, we've typically leveraged siloed or incomplete or third-party data, and most likely a combination of these together to try to get a good experience for those customers that are engaging with us. And as we see here, oftentimes the more data points that we try to bring in, the less accurate we become, because either that data doesn't match up together, it doesn't communicate across silos, or it just gets fuzzier and fuzzier the more narrowly we try to target. And what we really try to focus on is, while we're looking internally at ourselves to see all of the different data silos that we struggle with and all of the different channel-specific initiatives that we may have, our customer expectations are not in alignment with where we tend to be. Our customers don't see a difference. End users out there, or maybe let's take a moment and just think about all of us as consumers. I don't see a difference with a brand when I engage in a mobile experience, in the store, on the website, or maybe even over Twitter. I really expect those to be a consistent experience, and I expect that brand to understand, or that retailer to understand who I am. And I'm not really alone in that. If we look at what from a consumer survey, over half of folks out there saying, I purchase more from retailers that suggest products based on what I've done in the past. I am the classic example of that. If you show me something that's relevant based on my past purchases, I am most likely going to buy again. And I also expect, and again, about half of consumers out there really expect retailers to take into account not just what I purchased on the website, but what I purchased overall. I mean, how many of us have been subject to a retargeting ad or an email that went out about a cart that I left abandoned when really I bought that, or maybe I bought it in store, or I bought it on the mobile device, because those channels aren't necessarily speaking to one another. That's not a great experience for me as an end user, which means I'm then frustrated on the other end when you're not taking into account my past behavior. And really what that means is I get frustrated because there's not a respect of the relationship that I have with a brand or a retailer, because they're not looking at who I am as a consumer and how I'm trying to raise my hand with what I like and how I want to have a relationship with that brand. And if we look at what that really means and why we all do this, and really we're all guilty to this over the last several years, it's because our channels typically don't talk to one another, or don't know to talk to one another. In the email channel, I may know a few things about you. I may know what you've clicked on, but I don't necessarily know who you are, the person. When we get into social, I may just have a snapshot of you that's not connected to anything else. You may know that I'm Adam, but that's about it. You may not know anything else about who Adam is as it relates to what I've done in store or online. And then when we get into my MarTech applications, really hard for them to know anything beyond their scope and their silo. And the problem just keeps continuing. Oftentimes we try to bring back multiple data sources into our CRM or data warehouse initiatives, but am I matching up the right sets of data? Did I stitch together two people that were not the same person, and therefore I have bad data now that I'm taking action on? All of these really blur the lines as we go through, and this is the reality that we've all faced as the explosion in the MarTech landscape has really led to lots of point solutions that aren't necessarily all data open and listening to one another. And so that's really where, from a customer data initiative, we see the concept of a customer data platform being so integral to the success of today's modern marketer. When you look at the amount of data and what you could know about your consumers and your audience, and where you could take action on that by building more personalized experiences on your website, by working with vendors like Maxymiser that can be more receptive to that data, you're going to create that experience that the end consumer is craving right now. And let's face it, if you're not creating this experience, it might be your competitor that does. So having this agile, real-time look at your data and connecting that with the places where you make decisions and take action on that data is key to being able to converge and create the relevant experiences for today's customers. So we're going to start today with a bit of a conversation around where this data is generated. And for us at Tealium, we tend to start to talk about the data layer itself. And for us, the data layer is the place on your website or in your mobile application where you're starting to learn about what these visitors are doing. If I'm on a product page, for example, these are all those great rich attributes that are describing the product and the page itself. What color, what size, if they're adding to their cart, what action did they just take, SKU numbers, all of those great things. That's really the source of this first-party data. And as I look for this over time, these building blocks of the data layer are going to be so key to helping me understand who this person is, not just in one channel, but across those channels. I think in an ideal world, we would segment our customers once and then activate all of our marketing tools with that single source of the truth. But really the way that different vendors are working together towards that same strategy, and the goal of the data layer is to bring more order to that chaos by having a common language that, again, describes the product, describes the order, describes the customer, that can really be understood by all of your digital marketing partners. The goal is to define this once in your own language, enrich it with what else you can learn from other technologies or what else the consumer is doing across their journey, and then distribute that in a real-time fashion onto any of the vendors, such as Maxymiser, that you use to then take action on the customer. And when we think about this, it's not just the web experience that is so key. If we think about, for a lot of us, we're dealing with call center information, we're dealing with maybe loyalty programs, mobile websites, mobile apps, in-store, maybe even Internet of Things. All of these things are telling us a part of the journey. But if we take it for just a moment, just thinking about a traditional desktop environment and a mobile environment, our consumers are switching back and forth between that a number of times. In fact, a study earlier last year from an agency in the UK found that consumers shift devices up to 21 times per hour, which sounds insane when you first start to think about it. But then I challenge you to go home tonight and you're sitting in front of the TV. You probably have your mobile phone on the coffee table. You probably have your laptop open because you're still getting through some of those emails, or maybe you're actually then doing a bit of shopping. Maybe you have an iPad there as well, like me. But if you look at over an hour, the number of times that you just shift between devices to check an email, see that push notification that came across, go back to what you're doing on your laptop. And then, quite honestly, if you're like me that just got an Apple TV as well, there's a commerce experience that exists there as well, potentially. So the number of times that I'm actually shifting devices could easily be more than 21 times an hour. And each one of those spots that I'm interacting on, each one of those channels, is generating data about me and has a part of the story to tell about who I am as a consumer. And if I can look at bringing these pieces of data together and stitching together that journey, I will then understand that this is the same person who has abandoned a cart in one channel, that has certain favorites that I might classify from a segmentation standpoint as a big spender because their lifetime value is over a certain amount. Maybe they're a VIP as well because of their lifetime loyalty program level. All of these things will then inform the strategy so that I can build a true omnichannel, not just profile, but an omnichannel experience for that consumer. And I think this is one of the biggest questions that exist for most marketers, which is around the concept of a multi-channel or an omni-channel approach. I'm interacting maybe across lots of channels, but if I don't have a single look at who that person is and continue the experience across all of them, I'm really letting down that consumer as they want to move from browsing online and then shifting in store to maybe try on something that they had looked at from a clothing retailer, for example, online. And this really comes into a concept of not thinking about data as a destination, but really thinking about how all throughout the organization, we play a part in building data and consuming data as marketers and customer insight professionals. We liken this to the idea of the customer supply chain of data. Each one of us, if you think about your marketing organization and you think about the folks that are looking more at email, the team members that are focusing on paid or organic, the folks that are working with in-store or merchandising, they're each gathering data that's telling you something about that consumer experience, and they're contributing to that overall understanding of who this person is. And if they're not participating with one another and they're not making sure that their systems talk to one another, the insights that you gain in one aren't necessarily going to help me in the other channels. So I might see some great gains in my on-site channel, but am I using that same gains to help fuel other experiences, maybe an email or otherwise, to drive people to that on-site experience? That's really what becomes key. We joke here a bit in the office about real time and why real time is important. For a lot of folks that have been doing something related to this, where they've been bringing together imported data from multiple channels to get maybe in a data warehouse an understanding of who their customers are. If you think about the number of hops and the amount of time it takes to get data summarized from one system, imported into another, you're easily talking about 24 to 48 hours before you have that imported good look at data, perhaps in your EDW or in another place. But by not looking or not working in this batch backward facing mode, but really switching to a data supply chain method where all of your consumer touch points, all of your MarTech applications are speaking together, you're then able to act on that in a second as opposed to waiting 24 to 48 hours. And we joke about this in the audience with one of our customers, Beachbody, whom I suspect a lot of you know, that has big brands like P90X and others. If you don't target me in those few minutes a year when I'm actually really interested in losing weight or getting in shape, and you don't target me for a day or two later, you've lost that window, or that guilt window that I have as a consumer that's really willing to get healthier. And if you think about this, this exists throughout all disciplines, not just in a weight loss, but really in retail and otherwise. So when we think about where I need to connect this data, this is where Tealium has really focused its entire ecosystem. It's around the 900 plus vendor technologies that cover really 100% of your stack. If we think about the average consumer here that spends maybe just 10 seconds when they open up an email, but they might spend several minutes when they're interacting on your site, or even more time on Facebook or social interacting with your brand. If these different channels aren't speaking the same message or have the same understanding of where this user is in their life cycle, or if they have a product preference or something abandoned in their shopping cart, if I'm not telling the same story at each one of those, I'm losing the opportunity to engage that person to hopefully go deeper into the relationship. And so with that, Carl, I'll switch it over to you to continue the conversation.
Great. Thank you, Adam, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Carl Fredericks, Managing Consultant at Oracle Maxymiser, and today I'm going to go through an overview of how Maxymiser supports marketers and marketing initiatives towards digital optimization to enhance the customer experience. Before we jump into this, I'm going to just give a quick definition here to help kind of set the stage for what we'll talk about and what I find to be a good definition for an optimized experience. This was actually developed by Forrester last year, and it's an experience which firms consistently deliver content, functionality, and messaging that is tailored to individual needs and behaviors to drive improved satisfaction, engagement, and ROI. I think it's key here to actually distill this down into its component parts. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's start with the content, functionality, and messaging. I think the perception for a long time really is that the optimized experience, that testing and optimization in and of itself is really about putting the right content in front of your audience. It can be as simple as, and I'm going to go really simple here, simple as button color. It could be imagery, style sheets, basic structure of a site. However, we're finding more and more that it really extends beyond content and is a focus on components of the experience that involve functionality, how the actual process flow on the site, in the e-commerce channel, checkout may be working, and then what the ultimate messaging is at each of those milestones throughout the course of the visitor journey. So I think it's important to note that it really has extended beyond just simple content delivery and is more than just showing relevant content. It's about making the experience relevant. The second part of that quote was centered around individual needs and behaviors, and this is about providing visitors with messaging that's timely and understanding the activities and tasks at that given moment. So there are a whole host of different milestones that visitors go through as they visit and have a on-site web experience, whether it's actually navigating to the category that they want, finding the flight time that they want, actually getting their credit card inputted appropriately, and then finally checking out. So all of those different stages across different verticals really involve a whole host of different client visitor needs, as well as different behaviors and behavior examination. So measuring those behaviors and making sure that that's actually in place and you're doing that consistently. So the final piece really is that the satisfaction, engagement, and ROI component really centers around visitors' satisfaction and their lifetime value to the business. So it's not just a one-and-done sort of experience. We have to ensure that what they've seen is not just a buy once and leave and never come back, but it actually converts that visitor into a long-term visitor, someone that's going to recommend your service, your offering, and actually will come back to the site and engage with content. And that engagement piece really, again, centers around multiple touch points across a visitor journey, making sure that each of those different stages and touch points really do speak to that individual and speak to those audience groups that they would roll up under. The ROI, of course, is where business stakeholders, and our clients in particular, start to take notice. They want to make sure that there's a measurable benefit, that it's not just an additional cost center that's that we're going to tack into the e-commerce or marketing team budget, but it's actually something that's going to drive value and amplify the client experience and amplify revenue at the end of the day. All right, so optimization. Let's talk about a couple of things then, and really distill it down into what it means. I think it really is about finding and serving the best experience for each segment and ideally for each visitor. So it's really the who, what, where, when, and why, and tying all of those together so that you've stitched together a story that actually speaks to that individual and is based on a host of different values that we are tracking on our side, inherent to the Maxymiser platform, or arguably integrating with a partner such as Tealium. So that personalization obviously it seems very simple. We identify segments and serve them optimal content. However, with so many changing considerations, time will elapse before they actually purchase, so there'll be a gap between the time that they viewed a product and the time that they ultimately convert. And as Adam mentioned, you've got data feeds that are coming in 24, 48, 72 hours after the actual data component has been captured and associated to a given visitor, and a lot can change in that period of time. So I think there are critical things that we can identify that actually maintain over the life of the visitor: gender, language, geography, device type in many cases, but there are a whole host of different things that actually change in real time that we need to be monitoring. So for example, day of week, when a visitor is, say, checking in for or booking a hotel, and their check-in date happens to fall on a weekday as opposed to a weekend. Is a pool a required amenity? All of these sorts of things start to tailor and identify this visitor for us, so we can actually focus on business needs versus leisure needs in that very specific example. So timely, relevant offers are essential, and you're going to have different experiences that you may want to generate for male visitors, female visitors, and arguably for people that you've never seen come to the site before. How best to identify those audiences? If they've never seen your brand before, a brand message may be totally appropriate. However, a discount message, an initial hook to actually capture their interest, capture them as a long-term client, may be the right approach as well. So how are we going to get there? How are we going to serve the best experience for each segment, and then ultimately down to the individual? That's actually going to start with data. And the partnership that we have with Tealium allows us to really tap into a data set that is not typically available to our client base necessarily, inherently, or to the Maxymiser platform. So to take your program down the evolutionary path and along the maturity curve from simple A/B testing or even multivariate testing that focuses on kind of one size fits all, the real catapult here in all of this is getting data and using a foundation of data to assemble a data profile about visitors and large buckets of visitors that we can then apply in a real-time manner to deliver content that is optimal for that visitor. So it's going to be rich data, and the key here is real time. This next graph here, this illustrates a couple of different things which are key, just to illustrate how best to approach all these different data points. So all this data is great, but we have to have some sort of framework around how we manage that. So on the x-axis, we have the things that are changing. So characteristics about a visitor, if they have a different device, if their membership status changes, is their average cart size changing in terms of quantity, in terms of average order value, things of that nature, things that evolve over time Are people buying fewer products but with higher price points? Are they buying more products and staying with the same revenue amount overall? So those are the sorts of things that we would want to consider on that axis. On the y-axis, we have the number of attributes that we're trying to manage. And it's important to understand that when you start out, a rules-based targeting approach is probably fine, right? The characteristic is either true or it's false. It tends not to change very much, and marketers and e-commerce professionals that we work with tend to be able to manage that with relative ease. But complexity can rise, and I think once we get up to, say, 5 different attributes, it becomes hard to identify and isolate audiences and subsets of those audiences that are behaving in a way that's even more favorable than what's found to be optimal or less favorable, and really trying to pull those out of the broader data set is where we get into some challenges there. The values and attributes that I would consider essential here to consider would be gender, membership status, language. Again, things that are not changing a lot. But as you get to the next wave, where you have some sort of a hypothesis and marketer-guided affinity formulas, this relates more to things that evolve over time but can still be managed by the marketer. So this would relate to things like category views. If a visitor comes to your site and they tend to overview the men's department or the housewares department and underview or view less often clearance, children, shoes, and accessories, then we can start to carve them out of the general population and have a general sense of where that visitor wants to spend their time. So those sorts of affinity models, again, can be managed, but there are a few challenges once you get to a broad set of attributes beyond, say, 5 to 10. That's where I think it's difficult to categorize those visitors and maintain that categorization over time. So where does that take us? That actually takes us into one of the sweet spots with regard to the Maxymiser platform and developing a model that actually systematically goes out and discovers and uncovers audiences and their preferences. So there might be certain audiences that prefer the default, which you had today, certain audiences which perform at the aggregate optimal, again, the one-size-fits-all, and surrounding that, a whole host of different individual subgroups or subsets of your audience that actually prefer something slightly different. So those sorts of systematic approaches are really the only way to go after this audience, where there are a host of different values changing quite frequently, and of course, when the number of attributes starts to go well into the teens and hundreds of different attributes. So yeah, it's time for a systematic identification and really a delivery mechanism that can get that message, that offer, that content, and that experience in front of those respective visitors. So data plus technology to really deliver that final piece. So let's talk about real time. So I believe Adam had mentioned the Beachbody viewer. So we've got someone who has been characterized as a beachgoer, someone who's athletic, someone who's focused on fitness, someone who is more casual in nature, based on buying propensity, on categories browsed, products viewed, products added to cart, and ultimately to products purchased, right? There could be a whole host of different characteristics that actually identify this visitor and classifies them as a leisure viewer. However, within a given session, that visitor, or in a subsequent session for that matter, that viewer may actually switch gears and suddenly go down a more formal path. And by formal, I mean more formal dress wear, more formal clothing, more formal product sets, potentially higher end price points, larger cart values, things of that nature. And unless we're able to really uncover that in real time and pick up on that nuance, we're going to be pinned down against CRM data, for example, that just identifies a visitor from the last 10 experiences, when in fact now it's time to get a job, it's time to improve the wardrobe, and the visitor's preferences have changed, and it's actually happened in session. So at that particular moment, they need something notably different from what they have shopped for in the past. So the content personalization may need to be, it's needed as in the same session, and again, it's diverging from historical trends, so we need to pick up on that very quickly. So much like taste in food, cold products on hot days, hot products on cold days, we need to be able to manifest this same logic in the e-commerce experience and drive that sort of value. So it's not just historical data, but it's same session data, and it's not again a single device component, but it's across multiple devices, and that's really where a partnership with a Tealium Maxymiser engagement really will move the needle and help us identify this audience appropriately. Okay, so what segments do we have? So this is a key component, and this is a fairly simple slide. It's really that's it. It's fact versus opinion. So we know that there are certain characteristics. There are certain segments we have, and that's isolated in the data that we actually have in our CRM repository, in a custom data field, and arguably at the Tealium data layer as well. So once I have all that data, there are fundamental questions that you and your business team will have to ask yourselves, because there's a balancing act here in terms of all the things we know about the visitors, and there's a point in which you have to take that first step and start to use opinion to drive the next step, and that really comes in the form of testing and optimization. And I think at the center of all of this is a hypothesis-driven approach. So just like ninth grade chemistry, where you would recall, if you can, recall a question about something you were trying to prove or disprove, it's the same sort of scenario in testing, where we really try to identify the questions that make sense, derive a hypothesis, and build out a series of content elements or experience elements which are going to examine that behavior to see if we can answer that question in the affirmative or in a contradicting manner. Right or wrong, your hypothesis will be the driving factor and really give us the answer, the business answer that we need to use to actually make changes to the site and deliver optimal content. So you need to be ready to dive in, get started on the right foot, pose the right questions, and examine again the broad ends of the content spectrum, so you can really see if your different content experiences, your different functionality layers will actually move the needle and change behavior. Again, data is key, but you have to understand that we have to prove or disprove those beliefs, and a fact-based approach to determine if this can actually help your business. So who is the audience? What data is needed to identify them? Are there certain characteristics? Are there values that they enter themselves? Are they characteristics that we pick up from an email campaign, depending on which actual campaign they've seen? What are the things we need, and how are we best going to classify our audiences and our audience members? Are additional data feeds needed? Do we have everything that we need? Are we collecting an existing client profile? Again, a sort of a CRM database? Is it more of a Tealium data layer, or is it actually something that we collect in the Maxymiser platform? Are all those data feeds in place? Do we have access to them? Have they been categorized correctly? So not only do we need to understand who the audience is, but we need to know how to ingest them and how we're going to measure against those audiences. And then finally here is the implicit and explicit. So what are the rules for our data sets? Do we say that people who have this particular value, if they are in fact a member or a non-member or a new visitor or someone coming in from a display media ad, how are those visitors actually going to be classified, and are they, for example, included or specifically excluded from a campaign? Is it more implicit? Do we have to assume that if you have certain geographies using certain devices, so you've got West Coast and East Coast visitors using tablet or handheld devices, are they going to respond slightly differently? It's not explicit, but it is in fact implicit that they are going to be more mobile, more quick moving. Are they more focused on store location and service, or are they actually going to later do their research on a mobile device and switch over to desktop to make that final purchase? So what are the rules? You need to make sure that you've got a common base And I think that testing and adding in that data layer again is critical, because if the values change, how do our rules change about inclusion or exclusion? And we'll go through a couple of examples here when we get to the demo. So what's important by vertical? So I tend to spend most of my time in the retail vertical, but as you can see here, I've put together a relatively broad list of ideas that we've found to be general best practices and things very common for tracking against visitors for each of these specific verticals. So in retail, of course, we've got purchase frequency, average order value, categories most viewed, account created, payment methods, things of that nature, and those tend to be guiding principles and guides for actual audience segmentation that are truly meaningful. In the broader sense, though, there are going to be characteristics that may apply to all of them, but I think individual businesses need to understand what they have available and what are most relevant to their particular business offerings and their audience members in particular. So this should be a general guide in terms of what you should be collecting, where we should get it, and what values that we want to have within that. So again, an example of that would be average order value. You may have your lowest price product may be $1, it may be $100, so you have to make sure that you set up ranges that are appropriate to classify your visitors as clearance, sale price, standard, discount, premium, and super premium, right? Those sort of those value bands need to be very clear and noted within your overall testing hypothesis to make sure that you classify them correctly. One other thing that we want to make sure you do in terms of this whole data layer effort is understanding how does personalization affect my audience? Are they actually responding to a personalized content? Is this really meaningful to our business? So is this worthwhile? Is my audience extremely inelastic or elastic? Do they respond very favorably, very quickly to changes, or are they less transitional and actually stick to, they'll buy regardless of what content you have? So understanding, there are two different questions here. Does personalization work for my audience? And part two of this is what experiences are working best? So if personalization is found to be a key driver, then we want to make sure that we actually pursue that accordingly. So as I mentioned, the maturity curve of testing is going to span from A/B and multivariate testing all the way up to more advanced audience segmentation and personalization. I talked about managing algorithmically and looking for models that automatically go out and find different preferences and audience values. But in the real world, you need to start out with single pages, move to multiple pages, and really examine multiple touch points along the funnel. Again, this is going to be enhanced with a real-time data feed and some sort of component there that actually helps us identify what state of mind the visitors are in once they get started. Then we're going to be in a position to personalize and combine that with MVT to really understand a couple of key things. Interactions within the site itself and content interactions that are happening, and it will also enable you to more efficiently utilize your sample size to ensure that you're actually taking advantage of the time you have a test in market and actually personalize content as quickly as you can with the lowest possible costs to the business. So how are we going to prioritize? A couple of baseline questions here. Is this worth doing? Do we have enough traffic? Are we going to generate ROI? Are we moving the needle enough to actually warrant a personalized and targeted experience? The next thing is, subsequent to a test, while the Maxymiser platform can deliver the optimal content in real time following a test campaign, the question should be raised with internally, specifically with IT, as to whether or not the actual content can be implemented and delivered to visitors going forward. Will this clash with anything else? So this is more related to site redesigns, IT schedules, release schedules. Are there any conflicts that you would have with regard to specific offers or specific marketing campaigns that may intersect with your tests? So those all need to be considered. as part of your prioritization process, and certainly reviewed with a broader e-commerce team to ensure that there are in fact no conflicts. So you may have very narrow test windows and need to hit those in very short order and move on those very quickly. So that's important to note as you go through that process. Are there any internal politics? So, right, I mean, we can't ignore that there might be some fear in terms of ROI, fear in terms of risk to the business. I would argue that having that data layer, having a mechanism and a lever in which you can dial up or dial down the audience share that's actually exposed to a test campaign will enable you to more freely test without a huge risk to the business, and maybe you temper your campaign experience audience to say 5, 10, 15% of your total traffic so that you don't actually harm your business in a large-scale fashion while you are in fact uncovering new preferences and new optimal content. So who's going to do it? You have to have that partner. Again, either a full service solution or a self-serve model that's going to enable you to actually build campaigns quickly and efficiently. Make sure that QA is in place. Make sure that your content and agency support is there so that you can actually build out content in waves and have an ongoing testing process. And of course, the data layer piece and that integration model needs to be buttoned up as well. All right, and so with that, I'm going to hand it back to Adam, and we're going to go into the live demo.
Great, thank you very much, Carl, for that. And so what I want to do is spend a couple of minutes and just show a bit of what we've been talking about. And so I'll start on the Tealium side and walk you through a couple components within both tag management as well as in our audience segmentation and action engine audience stream. So I mentioned in the presentation the concept of the data layer. And the data layer, when we get started and we think about what's in the data layer, these are the individual building blocks that describe what the person is doing on your site or in your mobile application. I think about maybe the different ways that I describe my brand, my products, my order. So taking product as an example, I have an ID, a SKU, a name, a list price, maybe colors and sizes, etc. But beyond retail, to Carl's point with airlines, what's the city pair, what's the booking or fare amount. All of these things are part of the data layer that describe that particular experience. And our product actually guides you through building these data layers as well. So I can actually come in here and leverage, for example, if I'm using Oracle Commerce, for example, our integration with Oracle Commerce will go ahead and extract out the most popular data points for your data layer here. Again, describing the page, the metadata, elements of the order, shipping information, etc., so that you have these automatically available to your ecosystem of vendors. But then more importantly, as these are appropriate, use these as the building blocks to understand who the person is so that you can create those personalized and relevant experiences. So I define my data layer, I start there. The next step that I might want to do is to then come in and actually add a technology that I want to work with. So in this case, let's take a look at Maxymiser. So whether I want to load Maxymiser in a synchronous or asynchronous fashion, we've got both of those developed here so that I can simply come in, add in the tag or the implementation that I want, determine where I want to load Maxymiser across all pages or just on some, and then determine from my data layer what elements do I want to expose out to Maxymiser. So all of those custom parameters and data points that will help you build that more personalized understanding of who somebody is. So that's the first step, really focusing on the data layer. But the second step is really leveraging what I could know about the person across multiple visits or multiple channels. And this is where Audience Stream, or having an understanding of who the individual is or who the audience really is, by not just using the data points out of the data layer, which is, Adam looked at product 123, which is a blue t-shirt, but looking at the trends and behavior that describe Adam or the end user over time. And that's where I want to build attributes that describe my visitors. So these could be things like a badge that are focused on more of an achievement, or a metric to sum up maybe multiple values, or one of my favorites, which is a tally. Let's keep a tally of all the different brands or categories that Adam interacts with so that I can then focus on his favorite brands, or maybe a shift in his behavior based on, to Carl's point, looking more at beach and casual wear towards, and then over time going a bit more upstream and focusing on more luxury goods or higher ticket items there as well. So I can come in here as a marketer and determine what data points I actually care about most. And let's say in this case, I'd love to create that often talked about, but sometimes not realized potential around the lifetime value. So I'll come in here and I'll actually create that lifetime value metric. And in this case, I need to actually build this metric. Since I don't have this as something that's already been established, I want to increment this new metric called lifetime value. And in this case, I want to go and use, again, the building blocks in the data layer and say, inside of the data layer, I have an element called order total. Total. And I want to go ahead and pull that up here, order total. And now every time I see order total, or someone makes it to that order confirmation page, I want to take that value out of the data layer, and I want to increment my brand new metric called lifetime value. And so now I have a new metric that describes my customers called lifetime value. Maybe I want to go one step deeper, and I want to say, you know what, I don't just want the lifetime value of all my customers, but you know, I'd really love to badge them based on their spend levels. So in this case, let's go ahead and create a big spenders badge. I can maybe make it green to be the color of money. And I want to assign this badge at a certain level. So I want to assign this badge when they spend, their lifetime value is over a certain amount. So I can simply select lifetime value is greater than $500. So now in the span of, I gotta give this a name. Now in the span of a couple of minutes, I've not only built a new metric called lifetime value, but I've also categorized a whole new audience of people that have spent over the threshold that I care about. And so with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Carl, and you can show us how we can actually take action on some of this.
Great. Thank you, Adam. All right, so you should all see my screen here with a mobile device rendering a potential test idea here for Connected Interiors, which is an in-house retail furniture website that we've designed for demonstration purposes. And what I'll talk about now is exactly how we would actually take that level of detail that Adam's just walked you through and embed that into a campaign, which in this case is actually testing a content element at the top of the page, the primary banner or hero imagery that sits at the top of the page. So coming in here to the UI, I can actually select that item. We're looking at the default page here. So I've got a discount message and our model here on the couch. We can then switch this into a drapery imagery. We can have a bath image with towels, and we can actually overlay that. You can see how quickly and easily I can go through and actually carve out different components of the page and actually modify those accordingly. So in my previous example, we've got Beachbody, who's moved to business and business casual, business formal wear, whatever the case may be. So there may actually be an experience in here that we want to isolate for that particular visiting audience, and I'll show you how quickly you can do that. So we've got our default drapery, bath, accessories, and lamps options. It may not be such a strong value proposition to show the candles here to someone who's arguably been identified as a big spender, business user, something along those lines. So we can quickly come in here, select our image, and make a change to that banner. So in this case, I'm actually going to pull content directly out of our UI, and we're actually going to promote have a credit card promotion there when we in fact have that particular audience member or visitor characteristic coming into the site. So there we have our new accessory based content variation. I'm going to go ahead and rename this variant. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and call that credit card. All right, so we have our new credit card component. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do then is I'm going to switch over into targeting. And this is where the rules and the data layer will really come into play. As you saw, this was a mobile device. This is a campaign targeted towards mobile users. So we're going to add a rule that says the only people who are actually going to be included in this particular campaign are those that are coming in on a mobile device. So we're going to enter a value here, and we're going to say that only phone visitors are going to be included. We're going to add that condition. And now the only visitors who will be actually included in this campaign are those who are actually coming in on a phone device. Now the content targeting piece and the personalization piece now we'll need to tie in data points that, again, are available from the client, available on the Maxymiser server at the time that the test is actually generated, and then the additional layer of Tealium can also be included here. So if I come in here and I add a rule, we're going to do a couple of different things. So there may be something that we actually pick up directly from Tealium in this case. We're going to pull in the gender. So we're going to have our male visitor. We're going to add that condition, and we're going to build out this profile and make sure that that visitor is only exposed to one particular piece of content and is arguably excluded from the campaign itself. So it's not just the phone, but it's going to be phone and a male gender component. We're going to look at something related to maybe the last category that they viewed. Again, something that the visitor may actually be able to, the visitor may pass through to us, or it's something that Maxymiser could pick up, or in this case, it's probably more likely to come from Tealium as well. So if they've actually come in from, we'll say lighting, we're going to add that condition. And we'll add one final rule here to illustrate this, and this is going to be the customer value. And the customer value, we're going to just go ahead and enter in big spender, having just created that in our Tealium layer. So the big spender characteristic then will isolate that audience, and we can then say when in fact those three conditions are present, the only thing that we're going to show that particular visitor is the credit card experience, and we've basically built out a targeted rule which isolates that credit card experience to lighting. Everyone else who's coming in on a phone device will be put into the ABN test structure to see exactly which content rendering draws the most and highest engagement level and highest purchase level. So we go ahead and save those changes. And basically, there's our rule, 3 conditions to drive one experience. Everybody else is in the phone experience. And then we have our content experiences here, which then will render as expected, depending on how that all played out in the real world. So again, it's going to be layering on data that we have available to us, but it's really going to be the intersection of Maxymiser, client data, and the data layer coming from Tealium. All right, so at this point, we'll switch over and take any questions. Anna, I'll hand it back over to you.